On July 9, 2024, a woman answered her front door to a young man she had welcomed into her home for 18 months. He carried a bag containing her daughter's belongings and a card addressed to her and her husband. She had every reason to believe this was merely an awkward, ordinary farewell. She did not know he had spent 11 days preparing for what came next, or that a knife was concealed inside his backpack. What unfolded within that house during the next 4 hours would leave 3 members of one family dead. A nation wondering how well anyone can truly know the person their child brings home, and laws on the verge of being rewritten because of what one man did with a crossbow he had legally bought online. This is Carol Hunt's story, not simply how she died, but who she had been before one knock at the door altered everything. Carol Hunt was born around 1962 or 1963. Public information available about her early life is extremely limited in the record. There is no confirmed birthplace, no record of her parents, and no known maiden name. There is no information about the schools she attended. What remains known is that she formed friendships that endured throughout her life. Carol was part of a close-knit group of 4 women: herself, Leah Holloway, Dion Smith, and Abigail Phillips, who remained close from childhood through their late 50s and early 60s. Leah would later remember Carol as a beautiful person, the sort of friend whose presence could brighten a room. Almost nobody beyond that circle ever had a detailed understanding of what Carol's life was like before marriage. There is no confirmed profession, no record of what she studied or where she worked during her 20s. That lack of information is not an error in the reporting. It simply reflects who she was. Carol spent most of her life away from public attention, and there had never been any reason for anyone to record her life before the world had reason to ask. It was Leah who stood beside Carol on the day she first met a young man named John Hunt. Back then, John had not yet become a familiar voice on British television. He was serving as a Metropolitan Police officer in Kilburn, North London, in a role entirely unrelated to the profession that would eventually make his name. It was Carol who noticed an advertisement in the local Harrow Observer newspaper seeking a trainee broadcaster to deliver commentary for Ladbrokes in-shop racing service. She urged John to put his name forward. Colleagues who had known him for decades would later recall that Carol was the person who encouraged him to pursue that chance, to make the career move that most people would persuade themselves to avoid. John followed her advice. He began with greyhound commentary before progressing to horse racing and eventually establishing a career with BBC, Radio 5 Live and Sky Sports Racing, making him one of British racing's most recognisable voices. Years afterward, a colleague would still recall John proudly displaying photographs of his daughters at a Christmas gathering, more than 20 years before these events, showing that his role as a husband and father was never detached from the professional identity audiences knew. Carol and John married in Harrow in 1991. In the years that followed, they welcomed 3 daughters. Amy was born in 1993, Hannah in 1996, and Louise in 1999. The family remained close through those years. The family made their home in Bushey, a peaceful town northwest of London, creating the sort of life neighbours would later describe in strikingly similar terms. Private, gentle, close-knit. A neighbour described them as the loveliest family on the street, while another recalled them as quiet people who generally kept to themselves, yet remained warm and kind whenever their paths crossed. Within the household, Carol seems to have found a careful balance in motherhood. She took a keen interest in her daughters' lives without attempting to dictate them. When the girls became adults, the family house did not turn into somewhere they merely returned to for holidays. It remained the heart of their lives. Louise eventually established her own dog grooming business in an outbuilding on the property, serving local clients who brought their dogs to her. Her school friends remembered her as cheerful, diligent, and nearly always smiling. Hannah qualified as a skin and beauty therapist, building a reputation among her clients for being excellent at her work and easy to love. Amy, the eldest, stayed close to her parents and sisters and would later become her father's main source of support. By every account, The family's social life beyond the house was ordinary in the finest sense. They shared meals out, pub lunches, birthday celebrations and holidays, including trips to Italy and Disneyland. Nothing about it pointed to a household seeking anything out of the ordinary. Instead, it portrayed a family that simply enjoyed being together, something rarer than people sometimes imagine. Everyone who knew them described them as a family that genuinely and deeply loved spending time together in one another's company. In a later interview, Amy remembered one evening when she and her sisters sat together discussing how fortunate they felt to have been raised as they were, supported, safe, and rarely troubled by anything that truly mattered. As Amy later recalled, Hannah came home and told their mother how deeply grateful the three sisters were for the life their parents had created. That conversation, remembered only afterward, reveals something uncomplicated about Carol's place in her daughters' lives. She was still someone they wanted to come home to and tell things to, even after becoming grown women. Sometime around late 2022 or early 2023, Louise began a relationship with a 20-something former soldier named Kyle Clifford. He had spent about 2 years serving in the British Army, though illness meant much of that period was spent at home, and he had never experienced active deployment. When he met Louise, he had already left the military and was unemployed. For some time, the relationship seemed normal from the outside. Clifford became part of the Hunt family's routines. There were regular Sunday lunches, birthday gatherings, and eventually an entire family Christmas lasting several days, with food, games, and the familiar bustle of a happy home. John would later look back on that particular Christmas warmly, remembering nothing that indicated the man at their table could do what followed, while something darker was quietly taking shape beneath the surface. As their relationship continued, Louise began noticing patterns that disturbed her: arrogance, sudden anger, and remarks she regarded as prejudiced and demeaning. Carol, observing from the sidelines as mothers often do, reportedly noticed Clifford's immaturity as well. Yet instead of intervening and telling her grown daughter what decision to make, she trusted Louise to resolve things in her own way. It was a restrained approach to motherhood, attentive, watchful, but never controlling. By June 2024, Louise had reached her decision. On the 26th of that month, she ended the relationship. Her family said she handled it as gently and maturely as possible, not because she was angry, but because she had reached a clear decision that whatever good remained between them could no longer compensate for the way the relationship made her feel. At first, Clifford seemed to accept it. Then that changed. He attempted to get her back. Louise refused to give way. What the Hunt family did not realize was that Clifford's refusal to accept the separation was about to become something deliberate. Investigators would later piece together an 11-day countdown, almost day by day, beginning shortly after the breakup. Clifford began examining John Hunt's work schedule and routine and everyday movements. He also investigated Carol's presence across her social media accounts. He searched for, then ordered, a compound crossbow, bolts, and a rope cocking device. Online, he purchased a 10-inch butcher's knife. He also obtained duct tape, rope, and 2 petrol containers. He even fired the crossbow into a tree as a test, making certain it worked properly. During that same period, he purchased a CO2 air pistol as well, although that particular item never arrived before everything else unfolded. He checked the weather forecast for the day he had carefully chosen. He wrote letters to his family. He also devised a story that would get him through Carol Hunt's front door. On the 9th of July 2024, that carefully prepared plan became reality. At 2:32 in the afternoon, Clifford reached the Hunt family home carrying a bag containing Louise's belongings, a card addressed to Carol and John, and a knife hidden inside a black backpack. Carol opened the door. Doorbell footage would later record their exchange. She treated him kindly, as she apparently did with almost everyone, and allowed him inside to return Louise's possessions. Within minutes, the timeline indicates that somewhere between 6 and 13 minutes after he arrived, Clifford killed Carol Hunt with the knife he had purchased specifically for that purpose. He stayed inside. Then, around 3:10 p.m., he returned to his car and retrieved the crossbow, concealed beneath a white covering, before taking it indoors. He waited. Louise was working in the garden outbuilding where she operated her grooming business, and Clifford knew her routine well enough to realize she would eventually enter the main house. At 4:13 p.m., she arrived. The events that followed continued for more than 2.5 hours. Clifford bound Louise with duct tape and kept her captive inside her own home. During this period, he searched through her phone, reading her messages and checking her Instagram activity. Even then, he remained consumed by jealousy over the life she had without him. At one point, he searched online for information about whether disabling a smoke detector would set off an alarm, suggesting he may have been considering setting the house on fire. Shortly before 6 o'clock, he used Louise's phone to message her father, John, asking when he would be home, deliberately ensuring John remained away while events unfolded. During her captivity, Clifford raped Louise. Then, before 6:50 p.m., he killed her. At 6:51 p.m., Hannah Hunt returned home. She had no idea what awaited her. Within a minute of arriving, she managed to send an urgent message to her boyfriend, Alex Klein, asking him to contact the police immediately, telling him Clifford was there and that people were being tied up. It was the quickest, clearest warning anyone outside the house would receive. At 6:54 p.m., Clifford shot her. 1 minute later, he left the property. Despite being shot, Hannah refused to stop doing everything she could. She moved through the house, discovered what had happened to her mother and sister, then picked up Carol's phone and called 999. She remained on the line long enough to name her attacker, tell the operator she had been shot, and provide the address. Police and paramedics arrived at the house at 7:10 p.m. Hannah remained alive when they reached her, but she could not be saved. By then, Clifford had disappeared. He drove toward Enfield, and an enormous armed manhunt began almost at once, as police publicly warned residents not to approach him because he was believed to have a crossbow. Eventually, he was discovered concealed in vegetation near Lavender Hill Cemetery, approximately 22 hours after he had first arrived at Carol's door. As armed officers approached, Clifford aimed the crossbow at himself and fired, leaving him paralyzed. No police officer fired a weapon. He was arrested and treated at hospital while under police guard. Because his injuries were so severe, Clifford was not considered fit for a formal police interview until the 16th of September 2024, over 2 months after the killings. During that interview, he reportedly called his actions atrocious and apologized. Soon afterward, he faced 3 murder charges: the rape of Louise Hunt, her false imprisonment, and 2 weapons offences connected to the knife and crossbow. On the 22nd of January 2025, Clifford admitted the 3 murders, the false imprisonment and weapons charges, but rejected the rape allegation, requiring a separate trial in March 2025. His defence claimed the forensic evidence could be accounted for by consensual contact earlier in their relationship. Prosecutors presented expert evidence that undermined that account, connecting the physical findings directly with the chronology of Louise's captivity. The jury deliberated only briefly. After approximately 45 minutes, they delivered a unanimous guilty verdict. Clifford declined to attend his rape trial. He likewise refused to appear, either personally or through video link, at his sentencing on the 11th of March 2025. Judge Joel Benathan considered compelling him to appear remotely, but ultimately ruled that the family's opportunity to speak openly about their loss should not be interrupted by a forced or disorderly broadcast. John and Amy Hunt delivered victim impact statements in court, explaining what they had lost and, in John's case, thanking Carol for the wife and mother she had always been. The judge's finding was unequivocal. He determined that Clifford had planned, or at least seriously considered, killing all 3 women, rather than Louise alone, and Hannah being caught in an unfortunate accident of timing. Every element of the preparation, from the cover story deliberately created to get through Carol's door, to his knowledge of Louise's routine, to the message designed to keep John away, portrayed a man carrying out a plan against the whole family. Clifford received 3 separate whole life orders, one for every murder, meaning he can never qualify for release. He was additionally given 20 years for rape, 8 years for false imprisonment, and 1 year for each of the 2 weapons offences, all to run concurrently with sentences that already ensure he will die in prison. Technical analysis. From an investigative perspective, this case demonstrates how comprehensively modern digital evidence can rebuild a crime almost minute by minute. Online purchase records connected Clifford directly with the crossbow, bolts, rope-cocking device, 10-inch knife, duct tape, and petrol containers, all purchased during the 11 days following the breakup. The paper trail made any claim of sudden, unplanned violence extremely difficult to maintain. The Hunt family's doorbell camera also became one of the case's most significant pieces of evidence, recording both the audio of Carol's final conversation and visual confirmation of how Clifford persuaded his way inside. Search history recovered from his devices, including checks of the weather for that particular day, research into whether disabling a smoke detector would trigger an alarm, and searches concerning John's work schedule helped establish the psychological preparation behind the physical planning. Significantly, the knife used to murder Carol was never recovered, but prosecutors did not need the weapon itself. The combination of purchase records, packaging evidence, and Clifford's eventual guilty plea provided more than enough evidence in court to obtain the conviction. In the rape case specifically, forensic timing evidence, rather than a confession, ultimately resolved the uncertainty, enabling experts to show that the physical findings matched the hours of Louise's captivity instead of an earlier consensual encounter that Clifford's defense sought to rely upon. The reconstructed sequence is worth stopping over because investigators rarely manage to map out a crime almost minute by minute as they did here. 2:32 marked his arrival. Roughly 2:39 to 2:45 marked Carol's murder, 3:10 marked when he collected the crossbow from his car, 4:13 marked Louise's return to the main house, 6:51 marked Hannah's arrival, 6:54 marked the shot that killed her, and 6:58 marked the call that ultimately brought police to the address. Such precision resulted from combining doorbell audio, telephone records, message timestamps, and 999 call logs into one uninterrupted account, creating the sort of case in which the digital trail left by both victims and offender reveals nearly the whole story before one witness ever enters the stand. Psychological analysis. Psychologically, the strongest feature of this case is the distance between rejection and response. Louise did not abandon Clifford cruelly or without giving reasons. According to every account, she ended things as gently as possible, simply deciding that the relationship was no longer good for her well-being. For Clifford, that rejection seems to have developed into something much darker than heartbreak, a sense of entitlement to control that survived the relationship itself. The court concluded that his hostility was not limited to Louise. It reached the relatives he believed had backed her choice to leave, which is exactly why Carol and Hannah were not accidental casualties, but, the judge said, included in the plan from the beginning. Investigators further discovered that Clifford had searched for material associated with a well-known misogynistic online influencer less than 24 hours before the murders. Evidence that was never presented to the rape jury, but which prosecutors introduced during sentencing as context for the contempt the judge eventually outlined in his ruling. None of this constitutes a clinical diagnosis. No public assessment has established any particular disorder behind his behavior. What the evidence does reveal is a pattern increasingly recognized within domestic abuse research. Separation itself, rather than the relationship, is frequently the most dangerous point when a partner who believed he had the right to control someone views that person's independence as the ultimate affront. There is also something important about how ordinary Clifford appeared until the instant he did not. He attended family Christmas dinners and behaved as though he belonged there, accepted by everyone around the table. He could laugh and socialize with people he was, within months, preparing to murder. That ability to separate one part of his life from another, remaining a welcome guest at someone's table while secretly preparing to unleash violence upon them, is among the most disturbing patterns in this case, and it helps explain why John and Amy have since rejected the assumption that families should somehow have known it was coming. Noticing arrogance or a volatile temper in a daughter's boyfriend is one thing. Foreseeing a carefully planned triple murder from those same warning signs is an entirely different and much less reasonable demand. But there is another detail. This may be the part that surprises you most. When Clifford purchased that crossbow, there were virtually no significant restrictions preventing him from doing so. Unlike firearms, crossbows in the UK did not require a license, background check, or registration, only an age requirement and several restrictions governing their use. A weapon with enough power to kill 3 people with the same deadly effectiveness as a firearm was, under the law, treated more like sporting equipment than a regulated weapon. This case became the catalyst for change. In March 2026, the British government's official response to its review specifically referred to the Bushey murders as the reason for proposing sweeping new restrictions, including compulsory licenses for existing owners, suitability checks before purchases, a complete ban on future sales, a prohibition on broadhead arrows, and tougher age checks for online buyers. As of the time of this video, those measures remain in consultation rather than being fully implemented, but they exist because of what happened inside a single house in Bushey. Just as remarkable is how John and Amy Hunt decided to channel their grief. Instead of allowing Carol, Hannah, and Louise to become nothing more than names connected to a headline, they established the Hunt Family Fund, directing support toward organizations that help and encourage young women, transforming the independence Clifford sought to punish into something the family now actively supports in others. Racing events, including a renamed race at Cheltenham, have subsequently raised substantial funds in the family's name, carrying Carol, Hannah, and Louise's legacy far beyond the courtroom. Amy, in particular, has strongly challenged the label crossbow killer, which the press quickly attached to Clifford, arguing that it presents him as some uniquely monstrous figure rather than what the evidence actually reveals, an ordinary-looking man who hid extreme misogyny behind an outwardly normal life. Since the trial, she has used her platform to discuss violence against women more broadly, the ways boys are taught to understand relationships, and the importance of refusing to let the story become solely about the person responsible for the harm. It is unusual in true crime coverage to see a family deliberately keeping the focus on the people who were lost, rather than simply the person who caused their loss. Carol Hunt spent her entire life creating things that endured. Friendships that lasted 40 years, a marriage that endured 3 decades, and a family that daughters always wanted to return home to.